Hey everyone, in this video we'll be learning how to turn your app or website designs into production-ready front-end code using Locofy. Then we'll learn how to set up a simple backend service using Hasura. And finally, by simply extending the code generated by Locofy, we'll connect them together to generate a full-fledged application. Without further ado, let's get started with the design. So we have this design open in front of us inside of Figma. Typically, once you have completed with a design, you need to hand this over to the developers. And this might take maybe about 3 or 4 weeks to convert into code. And we're talking about responsive, pixel perfect, optimized code. With Locofy, we're going to help you to take this down from 3 to 4 weeks down to about a couple of hours. And I'm going to be showing you how you can do that. First, let's open the Locofy plugin. Head over to this resources tab where you can search for Locofy. And then you can click run. Now, this is the Locofy plugin that we have opened. I'm going to also hide a couple of these bars so we can see more of our design. Awesome. So this is the Locofy plugin you'll see after going through a quick onboarding process. And I'll show you the main things you can do. Firstly, we have tagging of layers, and this is the most important feature of Locofy. I'll quickly explain what that is soon. Next, we have drag and drop for pre-built components, and this is great when you're working with a new design. We can also preview and view our code. Now, let me explain what tagging does. In this design, you can see that we have some elements like buttons, inputs, autocompletes, and so on. Taggings help us to bring this to life. Let me show you what happens if you do not tag. Let's quickly run a preview. And you'll notice that before we actually do anything, once you click on preview, we have actually already generated pixel perfect code. So this is actually running on live code right now. However, you can see when I hover over this, there is nothing that's happening. And same thing for this input autocomplete over here. So what tagging does is that it helps you turn these items into actual working components. And I'm going to be showing you how you can easily tag. So in order to tag, first you can select the element on your Figma canvas and then select the appropriate tag for it. So we have a button over here. We'll go ahead and select it. And you notice that we actually support the most popular UI libraries, such as Material UI, Ant Design, Bootstrap, and Chakra UI. In this case, we're not using any design library, so we can go ahead and click on None. You can also further customize your attributes inside of here in the Properties tab. Now let me show you the Styling and Layouts tab. And here's where you can actually define the styles of your button, define what this button looks like across different screen sizes, such as your tablet and mobile screen sizes, as well as define how it looks in its different states, such as when you click on it, when you hover over it. You can take care of those states as well. Now, for example, for this button, we might want this to be full width on a mobile screen. So what we can do is we can hit into the mobile width tab. This corresponds to 650 pixels in size and below. So in this mobile screen, let's convert the width of this button from a fixed 164 pixels to 100%. Great, so we'll show you a quick preview in just a moment. Now I'm going to also show you how you can easily add a hover effect. So we'll come into the hover tab over here. And we're going to just change this fill color to a slightly darker color. Awesome. So now we have taken care of how this button looks on mobile as well as how its hover effect looks like. Let's head over to Actions, where we can actually define what happens when you click on this button. So for example, you might want to scroll to a different part of the page, or we could change our page. So we're going to go with this. We also have other options available here, but we'll choose change page for this button. So let's locate the page we want to go to, and that will be this results page that we have designed here. So click on proceed, and that's it. So now we have linked this button to the results page, and that's tagging. So I'm going to give you a quick preview of what we have done so far. And you'll see now that our button actually acts like a button. So we have our hover effects. When we click on it, it's going to take us to the search results page. And coming back here, when we actually resize this browser, you'll see that our button snaps to full width on the mobile sizes, just as how we have set it up. And so we have tagged our button. I'll show you another example of tagging. This time we'll go with a UI library element that we have designed here. So this is a autocomplete. We'll go ahead and tag it as such. And since we have used the material UI design inside of here, I'll show you how we can easily work with it. So go ahead and select material UI. Choose the variation that we used. And now we can go ahead to continue configuring it. You can change things like our palettes. And we can enter a couple of options here that will show up when we actually click inside of this autocomplete. I'll finish up some configurations here, and then I will actually show you styling and layouts tab and the actions tab, where we actually don't have to take care of this because it's already predefined inside of the UI library. So let's click done and I'll do a preview. Now you'll see that just like our button, this is actually going to work. We have the options that we had pasted just now inside of here, and it can interact with it using your keyboard, just like this. And hovers, effects, everything works like an actual component. And you'll see here that I've also pre-tagged a couple of items, such as this other autocomplete, date time picker, and so on. So in order to actually help you to tag even faster, we have a feature that we have released called tagging with LocoAI. So what you do is you select the frame and you flip this switch over here, and LocoAI will automatically scan through your design in order to find items which you might want to tag. So here, for example, we have detected the inputs. This will be the inputs. We have a form, the inputs, and button. And what we can do is you can come inside here and click accept, accept, accept. Soon as LocoAI improves its accuracy, we're actually going to go right into your design, help you to tag everything with auto tagging, and you can finally review and make any corrections if required. And this is going to help take tagging down to even just seconds. So we are done with tagging. I'm going to actually highlight one more thing, which is responsiveness. And we understand that this is one of the things which takes up a bit of time, and I will just address that in a second. Locofy automatically detects the Figma constraints and auto layout settings that you have in your file in order to help you to generate responsive code. As you can see inside of Figma, we can make this slightly responsive. However, with Figma, there's a limit. When you start to shrink this design into this smaller width, you'll notice that the design actually starts to break down. So Locofy works as a layer on top of this so that you can handle this behavior. I'll show you how you can do that. First, note that inside of Figma, this is an auto layout frame that is set to horizontal direction. So these cards are stacked together horizontally. Now what we'll do with the Locofy plugin is that we can tag it as a container, which contains these two cards. Then head to styling and layouts, and we'll head to the mobile width, which you can see over here. And instead of having it stack horizontally, we'll have it stack vertically. And that's it. So now I'm going to actually show you the preview. And you'll notice now that as I shrink this design, at the mobile width, you can see that these two cards start to stack vertically instead of horizontally. So this is how Locofy helps you to take care of responsiveness of your design. Awesome. So now that we are done with tagging and we have checked our preview to make sure that all of our components are working correctly, responsiveness is looking great, we can actually sync our designs to Locofy Builder to do a couple more settings. So click on View Code. Inside here, we can choose the frames that we want to sync, and we're going to go ahead and sync across to our builder. Awesome. Let's click on View Code. Welcome to Locofy Builder. Locofy Builder opens inside your browser, and here's where you can do a couple more settings. There are three main things which you can do inside of the Locofy Builder. Firstly, you can view your code. Secondly, you can create components and add props for dynamic content. Thirdly, you can view and share a live responsive prototype. And of course, finally, we can export our code. I'm going to be showing you and running you through these items really quick. Firstly, for viewing code, you'll see here in the bottom panel, we have two code panels. On the left, we have the React code. This is a React project. So we have .tsx. And then on the right side, we have the CSS. Here you can also see we have code framework settings, and here's where you can actually tweak this in order to meet your coding styles or your team's coding styles. For example, you can switch between TypeScript, JavaScript, decide whether you want to use CSS variables, choose your styling such as Tailwind, which we have supported, and as well as your file naming. Once you have set up your code framework settings, the next thing you can do inside of Builder is to actually create components and add props. So creating components help you to modularize your code as well as to reduce code duplication. For example, we have this search flights container, which we might want to reuse in a couple of different pages. So we might want to create a component for it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. Now that I've selected the elements, I can click on Make Components and give it a component's name. In this case, search form is good. And then I'll hit Create. Now you'll notice that there's a new component called searchform.tsx that has been generated on the fly. So you can see the code for our search form as well as the CSS for this. Now let's reuse this same component on the next page, which is the results page. So we have the similar search form component over here. So in order to reuse the component, it's very simple. Simply select on this again, then click on Make Component. And instead of creating a new component, we are going to choose this existing component instead. So we'll click on that and that's done. So now we have reused this same component for the results page as well. Now let me show you how you can add props to your components as well in order to populate them dynamically with data. So here we have a couple of cards which we are reusing a few times, and we might want to actually populate this with data from an API or from a database instead. So first, let's go ahead and create a component for this. So we'll turn this into a card, and we might call this something like a destination card. Click Create. Now that we have created this component, you can see once again it has been generated on the fly. What we'll do is that we want some of these fields to be actually populated from data. For example, this Paris, we might want this to be dynamic. So let's go ahead and click on Add Value Props. And this Paris over here, let's click on this. So let's generate a prop name for this. We'll call this Location and click on Save. So you'll see inside of the code that we have a prop called Location added to our destination card. Now I'll show you we can also reuse this card for this Greece second instance of the card over here. So doing the same thing, we'll choose an existing card, destination card. And what you'll notice is that we also automatically generate props for you, as we have detected that some items need to be dynamically added. So for example, this price changes between the cards, the image changes between the cards. So we have also generated props automatically for you. Now, that's for creating components and adding props. I'm going to be showing you the final thing before we export code, which is to view and share a live responsive prototype. So click on this and we can share our prototype. So you can share it either via a link or by sending an email. So let's copy this link and open it in a new browser. As you can see, this is running on code, and you can open it on any browser, on your mobile phone and on your desktop. As you can see, it's fully responsive. Now you also notice that everything we have set up is working, just as how we have done it on our Figma plugin, and it is pixel perfect. So this is a live responsive prototype which you can share with your collaborators and your team, get user feedback, and you can do all of this and see how your product looks and feels without even writing a single line of code. Once you're happy with your live responsive prototype, we can head back to the Locofy Builder, and I'll show you the couple of export options that you have. So firstly, if you just need a snippet of code, you can simply click on copy code over here. If you want to actually deploy your file directly to the web, we have a deployment option. So for example, this typically works for simple things like websites and landing pages. You can easily deploy directly to Netlify or Vercel using your tokens. If you want to export your code in order to work further on it, and this is what we'll be showing you in this video, how we can easily extend this with data and APIs. That's what you'll do over here with the export button. Now you can actually export screens and components, or just components themselves. So these are the components which we had created just now, and I've also created a few more ahead of time. Or you can export the screens along with everything inside of it. So we'll go ahead and export everything, and we'll choose the download zip file method. You can also actually push this directly to your GitHub repository. So we'll go ahead and export. And that's it. So you can see that we have generated almost 6,000 lines of code. This is something that, would take engineers maybe a couple of weeks in order to write. And instead of writing that from scratch, Locofy helps you to generate all of this. And I'm going to be showing you how you can easily extend the code that we have generated in order to connect with your data, connect with APIs, and turn this into a full-fledged application. So let's head over to Visual Studio Code. Here we are in the Visual Studio Code. I'll quickly show you the structure of the code that we have exported. So you can see inside of here that we have pages. So these correspond to the different pages that we had exported over here. And then we also have a components folder which have all of the components that we have created just now. Now let me show you how we can extend some of this code with data. So inside of this Fickle Flight app, remember we had created these cards. Now let's populate this with data. I've created a component for this section called Popular Destination section. So we'll find that component inside of our code, VS Code. All right, here we go. So we have Popular Destination section. And you notice that inside of here, we have called our destination card that we had created, our props, location, price, card image. And these are currently hard-coded. So you can see 4 copies of these destination cards. Now what we want to do is to populate this with data from an API. So I'll show you how you can easily extend the code in order to do that. So first off, let's create our backend with data and APIs. You can do this on various different services such as Hasura, Firebase, Airtable, Google Sheets, and even create your own custom backend. In this video, we're going to be using Hasura. Hasura is a cloud service that lets you easily build GraphQL APIs on top of your database, such as Postgres, MongoDB, and more. I'm going to be showing you how we can quickly create a backend for our Fickle Flight app using Hasura. So here I'm inside the Hasura dashboard. I've already logged in, and the first thing you need to do is to connect a database. So we can connect a database over here. You can add an existing database which you already have, or you can create a new free database as well. So you can do this with a Neon integration that Hasura has together with Neon. So we have already created a database and we have connected it over here. Now let's have a look at our tables and schema inside this database. So the next thing you're going to want to do is to start creating your tables and populate it with some data. So let's go ahead and click on Create Table. Now let's give this a name, popular destinations. And now we're gonna create some columns for our data. So we are going to need to have, let's have a look at the props again. We need something for location, something for image, and something for the price. So let's give this image. Let's create one. That would be a text. We're gonna pass in an image URL. We are going to need name. So this could be the name of the card, the destination name of the popular destinations. We are going to need as well price. And finally, we are going to give this a unique code as well. Let's give it unique. And that's it. So our primary key is going to be a unique code. And we're done. So let's create this table. Awesome. So now let's look at the rows that we have here. We are going to need to insert a couple of rows. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's first do our Paris card. So the name of the destination will be Paris. Let's put the price as $444 for now. We give it a unique ID, and we have the image stored on a host. So this is the image URL. Let's click save. So now we have one entry on our table. I'm gonna go ahead and quickly add a couple more entries for our cards. Cool. As you can see over here, we have our entries for our popular destinations inside of our popular destinations table. Now that is for this. We're also going to need to populate some data for recommended holidays, for popular stays, and then afterwards when we head over to the results page, we are also going to need some data for these search cards, and we have also a recently booked section where we show flights that have been recently booked. So we're going to go ahead and quickly create a couple more tables as well for each of these, and we're going to create the table based on the props that we have inside of here. So let's go ahead and create our tables. Cool, so now we have created a couple of tables. Let's have a look at them. So we have routes, and this corresponds to our cards on over here, the flight cards. And then we also have some supporting tables, like the list of all the airports and given by a given code. We also have a list of airlines. So we can refer to this code and then get the name and logo as well. So this is a related table. So the next thing we are going to want to do is to create our APIs so that our app can actually easily access all of this data. So let's first create our API for the popular destination section. This one over here. So let's head to APIs. So here we are in the Hasura's API generator. As you can see, there is an endpoint for a post request. And with this endpoint, we can also pass along a GraphQL query. So let's create a query for our popular destination section. So we'll create a new query. Let's call it get popular destinations. And inside of here, let's choose the popular destinations table. And we want all of the information that we had, which is the code, image, name, and price. So you can see that in Hasura, with this Explorer, you can very easily create your GraphQL query. And let's just run it to see the response that we get. Perfect. So you can see that we are going to receive all of our data inside this JSON. Great. Now that we have created this query, let's go ahead and add it into our code. Here we are in our code. So first, let's go ahead and copy across our query that we had added just now. So we have saved this query into a constant over here called getPopularDestinations. So the next thing we want to do is to save the data that we get from our query inside of this data variable. And then finally, let's go ahead to use that data to render our destination cards. So let's first get rid of a couple of these cards. So next we need to use a map to loop through our data and render multiple destination cards. So let's go ahead and replace this bit. So here you can see that we are going to be using a map to loop through the data and render multiple destination cards. And you can see that we are going to be calling our data in order to populate the props that we had created in the Locofy Builder. And you can tell that now it is dynamically filled up instead of being hard-coded values like we had earlier on over here. And that's it. So now we have successfully added data for our popular destination section. So let's go ahead and hit save. Now I'm going to show you another example of something cool that we can do. So over here, we have the recently booked section. Now we want this section to be a live section where whenever users are making a booking for this specific route, that it just keeps popping in, and this is going to create a sense of urgency in our visitors, which is what we do want inside a travel app like this. So let's go ahead and create a streaming subscription inside of Hasura. So this streaming subscription is another very powerful feature inside of Hasura Cloud. It lets data that's coming into the table be automatically streamed to all users which are actually on the subscription. So let's go ahead and create this query. So I've pre-written this ahead of time, and I'm going to just walk you through what this query looks like. So let's go ahead and paste this here. And we'll also need a couple of additional variables. Great. So I'll walk you through what you are seeing over here. Instead of creating a query, we are going to create a subscription instead for this GraphQL query. And we are going to actually call this get recent bookings. Now in this case, we are actually going to want to pass some data into this query. So for example, when we are here, we only want to see tickets that are being booked for this specific search result, which is Singapore to Los Angeles, for example, right? And we want to only get the data starting from a certain starting point. This is a requirement for subscription APIs. Now here we are going to fetch data from our table in this streaming manner. And we have a couple of parameters. So the cursor is where our initial value. We're going to add an initial value. So it's going to start from our initial timestamp here. We're going to retrieve the data in ascending order and in a batch size of 3. And we are going to filter it by our departure code and the arrival code. So for example, in this case, Singapore to Los Angeles, right? And of course, it can be populated dynamically. Then we are going to actually want to pull all of the data related to our card in order to render this. So all of the props that we have here, we need to pull that data. Great. So let's try to run this and see what the result is from our query. So what you'll notice is that when we click play, we are going to get some data, and you can see that it streams in twice. So we had gotten one entry for 3 items, and then afterwards another entry because we had a batch size of 3. So let's try that again. 3 items here, and then afterwards another entry of 1. And you can see that it is still listening out for new entries. So this is a powerful streaming subscription that we are going to be adding into our travel flight website. Let's go ahead and do that. Coming back to our code, let's go to the recently booked section. Now, inside of our code, we are going to want to first declare some types. That's because we are pulling some data over here. And since we are using TypeScript, we want to define what all of these types are. So I'm going to define the types over here. So now that we have defined the types, let's go ahead and paste our query that we had created. So here it is. We are going to store this query into this constant. And finally, let's call our API inside of our component. So we have defined the type above. Let's add it as the type for our component. And also, because we are going to need to pass in some parameters for this query, if you do recall, we need to tell this query what the departure and arrival code along with the timestamp is. So let's go ahead and give it some props. Now let's save the data from our GraphQL query into a constant, which we have for data over here. And this is another variable loading, which lets us know whether or not we are still loading some items from the subscription. Here you can see we are declaring the variables that we need to pass on to the query. So we have the departure code, the arrival code, as well as the starting date and time. So remember how this is a streaming subscription that is going to be receiving entries 3 at a time? What we want to do is to actually create another variable for ourselves in order to store all of the entries that come in. So let's do that. We'll call this variable bookings. And then afterwards, we will use a use effect over here. And every time we have data streaming in, and what this does is that every time we have data streaming in from our API, we are going to store it inside of our bookings variable. Great. Now we have our bookings variable that has all the data of all the recent bookings. We're going to use that to render some of our cards. So let's remove the duplicates here. And then let's add a map once again to loop through our bookings variable and render all of the additional cards. So let's go ahead and do that. And there we have it. So now we are going to loop through our data to render these cards. And we are done. So I've also gone ahead to add the code for a couple more other sections. As you can see over here, we have our flight cards, and in the home page, we have another few more sections, such as the recommended holidays, popular stays, and so on. So now let's go ahead and run our code on our local browser. Here we have our Fickle Flight app open inside of localhost, which is running on our local device. And you can actually see that it is fully responsive. Once again, we can resize the browser just as how we have set it up. And you can also see that our autocompletes are working along with our date pickers. Now let's have a look at the data which we had added to our cards. Awesome. So we can see that this is actually rendering from data. For example, we can actually change some values on the database and just refresh this, and you'll see that the values will update. For example, for this Paris card, the price is currently 444, but I can change this on the back end. And we'll change it to something like 555. So I've tweaked it on the database. We can actually go ahead and refresh this, and you'll see that the data has updated inside of our app. So now we have Paris that is 555 instead. So you can see how we have easily extended our code with just a couple of additional lines. We can search a flight from Singapore to San Francisco and click on search flights. And over here, you can see we have a recently booked section where we can have items stream in. So I'm going to create another entry on the database. So I've created another entry on the database, and do have a look over here on the recently booked section. I'm going to create a new entry, and you can see that we have a new item that has popped in just a second ago, which I've just created. Another flight that has been booked at $9,999. As you can see, we were able to build a full stack app using Locofy and Hasura. And for a design like Fickle Flight, which would have taken 3 to 4 weeks to code from scratch, with Locofy we managed to easily convert it into front-end code. In this video, we also showed you how you can easily create a backend for our app using a tool like Hasura, and we then easily connected the code we exported from Locofy with our backend using just a few lines of code to create our full stack application. We hope you enjoyed this guide. Do let us know in the comments what other stacks you'd like us to do guides on, and happy building with Locofy.